Welcome to Yellowjackets Hive. I am Media Melanie, along with my co-host.
I'm Emily.
And we're here to intro an interview we did actually last week. We didn't think it was going to end up being a whole standalone episode, but it turns out that Marie Schley, the costume designer from Yellowjackets, had so much great information to share with us. We decided to make it its own episode. Um, Before we replay that interview, Emily, what were some of your favorite little tidbits and highlights from our conversation with Marie?
Just really all of the what went into creating the Antler Queen, I think was probably the most fascinating to me because like it's also really interesting to me that the fandom is the one that created the name the Antler Queen. Like she said in the interview that they referred to the Antler Queen as, what was it, the Oracle?
The Oracle, yes.
Yeah, so they were calling the Antler Queen the Oracle while they were filming, and the name Antler Queen was adopted by the fandom, but the showrunners use it now, which I think is so cool that they allowed the fandom to create a name for one of their characters. But I mean, the Antler Queen is obviously we think we know who she is, but it's still kind of a mystery. So it's just anything having to do with that is just super interesting to me. And it was really cool to hear what went into making the costumes and the aging process on the clothes. There's so much more that goes into it than you would ever consider.
Absolutely. And, along with the naming of the Antler Queen by the fandom, we talked about the Cannibal Council and how that's another name, that the fandom came up with, right? They just knew that they were going to be having a ceremony, at a dinner table. So I think it's cool the
Yeah.
fandom came up with the Cannibal Council. We've come up with some really good names, actually. Emily, you were the one who coined Cabin Daddy as well.
Yes.
Yes, and MFQ. I think I came up with the MFQ during a previous podcast episode. But I love the fandom. I think you guys are all going to love this interview with Marie Schley.
Yeah.
So feel free to, pop in any comments or questions and we can answer them later. But with that, here is our interview with Yellowjackets costume designer Marie Schley.
Enjoy.
I'm great. Thanks for having me, you guys. This is one of my most favorite projects I've worked on. So
Awesome.
Oh,
Well,
yay.
thank you for joining us. Why don't we just get started? Tell us a little bit about your job as a costume designer and then maybe some other shows that you've worked on in addition to Yellowjackets.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've I've worked on a show called Transparent, which I won an Emmy for in 2015, and I've done a lot of comedy on television. I did Single Parents, and I've worked just completed a season of Minx on HBO Max, which is now going to be on Stars. Early on in my career, I worked for a very famous costume designer, Deborah McGuire, on Friends as one of her assistants. So I've had a sort of a very wildly disparate career of different kind of tones and sensibilities. But
all right, and then you got into Yellowjackets, which we were chatting a little bit, before we got started here, and you talked about NDAs. Was this the most tight-lipped show that you've worked on before, or?
No, they're all pretty tight-lipped because, but I think interestingly enough, the the pilot we just made, no one really knew what it was going to be. They didn't know it was going to be a phenomena. So it's really only after season 1 that we realized that there's so many little secrets and reveals that added to the excitement and the fun of the show. So that's where I think it's really, it's less about non-disclosure, more about just keeping it fun, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping the audience on their toes and guessing. And there's obviously a lot of that. The speculation, within the fandom is wild. So it's very fun. With all
Well, actually, now that you mention it, I'm thinking like Ashely and Bart, the two writers, always knew where the show was going, but when we were kind of concepting the idea during the pilot, and when you do the pilot, you're really setting the look for the whole, the whole trajectory of the storyline and all the characters, and they we would have to be like, well, who is the Antler Queen? We need to know who it is. So we can tie it in a little bit to what that character is wearing, or and there were certain things that they knew and certain things that we had to obscure because they hadn't really figured out that story point yet. So, like, for instance, the Coed Naked Soccer t-shirt person who, when we were making the pilot, the wardrobe department called it the hunter because we didn't know who it was, and we didn't, and the whole idea was not to
reveal who it was.
So we had, and that's part of how that whole costume evolved into the look. This picture you're showing right now is like, we did a lot of like test run with a stunt. This is one of the stunt people who actually wore the costume. We tested out what looked best. You can see that this shirt's not aged at all. None of this stuff is like aged down or made to look old yet. It's still just like right.
And then you aged it and made it look old.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So as you mentioned, you worked on the pilot episode and episodes 8 through 10. Yeah. Of those, which one do you think was your favorite? I mean, you were involved in Doomcoming, obviously, and that, had a pretty heavy costume design to it.
Was fun. It has to be the pilot in the sense that that's where we originated so many ideas. We had a lot of time. I worked, very closely with Karan Kusama, the director, and Ashely and Bart, our creators, to really come up with, and even Showtime to come up with looks, and our amazing producer, Drew Cummins, to come up with looks that told this story and, added sort of depth to it. I mean, it was like, so, one of the things is this whole idea of all these Easter eggs. Like, that wasn't like something that people planned in the pilot. It's just something that evolved out of that process of designing the pilot and what restrictions we had, So, but it ended up being a really fun part of it. And so we leaned into it. And so Doomcoming was really fun to come back and do that because I really tried to tie in those looks as early ideas towards where we're going with that, like, cannibal council-y thing you're calling it. But basically that ceremony that they have around the fire.
What did you guys call the group of people having the ceremony around the fire? Was there a name that the crew had, or that was it? Cannibal Council was adopted by the fandom, so you guys didn't have a special little nickname for it?
No, we only knew that it was a ceremony of some kind.
Okay. All right. That's cool.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of notable 90s looks in the show, Coed Naked, being one of those. Tell us a little bit about how it ended up in the show. Was it like a no-brainer from the beginning, or, how did that evolve and how did it actually make it on Van?
Well, the fun thing about that shirt is that Ashely and Bart wrote that in. So,
really?
Being 90s kids and myself being a 90, that was one of the first things I read in the script. And to me, it was something that really sparked my imagination because that was such a iconic thing from the 90s. And you had a Coed Naked everything, In fact, when I was posting about this Instagram, on a friend of mine from sports in the 90s wrote rough, tough, and in the buff. And I was like, I forgot that there was that other like quote to it. So but it was really fun. So it really nailed it down in that time period. And they are amazing about those kind of details. They're incredible writers. And so when I was given the script to like interview for the show and that came up, that really sparked the idea of using clothes in the wilderness that were out of their closets, out of their suitcases, and mixed up and worn down and everything, because it was that idea of juxtaposing the teenage girl with this like wilderness life that they're leading in survivalism. So it was really fun to mix those two things up together. It's such a funny, that's the other thing about them. They've written a lot of like funny details into something that could be really scary, but you can't help but like smile a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, we go from, the cleaner version of the Coed Naked Soccer shirt here at the beginning. And, we talked about the evolution of it. And, this is kind of where we end up at the end, completely aged, dirty. Tell us a little bit about the aging process, not only for the Coed Naked shirt, but for the other wardrobe items as well.
Well, I mean, that was a really important part of it's a really important part of the show. In fact, our aging team in Canada is nominated for an award for Doomcoming because of the aging episode. Wow. But I think it's, Karen, the director, her sensibility is like very realism. And so she wanted to have all these, like, because we're talking about I think they're supposed to be out there for 2 years and just what it would be like. And these are precious items because it's a limited resource, it's clothing. They would be really dirty. I mean, if at the end of that pilot, there was a lot of talk about the makeup for Misty, for instance. They wanted to have cracked lips and her glasses are broken, and just to show what they've been through. And it really, I mean, that the aging on that Coed Naked t-shirt is amazing. It looks so real, and it really speaks of their struggles out there, I think, too.
Yeah, it
does.
You
guys have been camping. You know what it's like. You spend one day out there and your socks are filthy.
I mean, I can't even imagine, the 19 months or whatever. That's incredible. Some of these clothing items even make it out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
But they stayed intact the whole time. That's crazy.
Absolutely. So some other 90s looks that you created in addition to Coed Naked, we had Vans pink Converse, which, gosh, I thought I had pulled a photo. I'm not seeing it here. But the pink Converse is another kind of like 90s item. Was that something that was written in? Was it a detail added later? Tell us about the pink Converse.
The way that was written in was it just talked about a shot in the script where you pan up and you see the shoes come to the edge of the pit where the girls murdered. And one thing that was really important was to create costumes, like I was saying before, that look like a teenage girl. Like, we don't want it to just look like a tribal community or some fantasy. Like, really needs to be that these are teenage girls. And so a pink Converse coming to the edge of that really spoke to that. It, like, again, with like the juxtaposition of those furs that have all been like hand sewn together. And so that was the first clue. It's kind of like the Coed Naked t-shirt in that sense.
Right.
And then once we decided on something so distinctive, like a pink Converse, we knew we couldn't really assign it to any character because it would lock the story writers into who that person is, although they may have an idea, I don't know. And so we really are trying, that's sort of one of the Easter eggs throughout the series.
Right. Yeah. We read that they switch clothes and whatnot, and that I guess helps, keep the mystery going a little bit. So.
Yeah. And it's real because at some point it's really about, finding something clean, finding something warm, less than like, this is mine. It becomes a little bit more communal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Emily, how would you describe Jackie's look in Yellowjackets?
She's like your typical preppy girl, in my opinion, with the, like, that looks like it's like a Ralph Lauren shirt or something like that with the logo on it. And she wears the Argyle patterns and she's just very classically preppy.
She is. Marie, tell us a little bit about, creating Jackie's look. I mean, Jackie was definitely probably the most preppy of the 90s characters out there in the woods. What went into creating her look?
Well, those two pictures are from later in the series of episodes that a different costume designer did. But I think, she's... in the 90s, there was that heavy preppy trend. I don't know if you remember, where it has like with the rope, with the gross grain ribbon belts. And so it's not just, so there was like a trend going on at the time. Plus she's a little bit wealthier than her friends, and she's a little bit of a princess in that sense. So, and that kind of, she spoke to me as one of the, and New Jersey, you know, I grew up in New Jersey. It's East Coast, so it's a little bit more traditional rather than, I live in California now, but when you grew up in California, you're wearing more trendy clothing. So I think, so that those were all kind of the ideas behind her being preppy, but I think it really does speak to that moment in time.
Absolutely. You know, and Shauna, you know, her teen and adult version was very into the plaids. Was that something that you had a hand in, that vision?
Yeah, because one of the real challenges of creating this show for our director and writers was like finding the younger teen version and the adult version of all these characters. And they did a phenomenal job casting. All really talented actors, but like not all of them match up. You know, they have different eye colors, they have different hair colors. So there was a lot of talk about like how we're gonna make it obvious, especially in the pilot where you're trying to create the base of the story and everyone can like understand it really quickly. You know, that we know that that's young Shauna and that's adult Shauna, and that's, but so such a classic look of the 90s is obviously a plaid shirt over a t-shirt. That's such a grunge look, and it was, I mean, it's sort of become a classic look that people still wear. And also, and that's why it's funny to see you have the adult Shauna who's wearing the mom version of it. You know, it's transitioned from something a little bit more rebellious to something a little bit more suburban. So that was a way of visually tying them together so that the audience knows that that's the same person, but also kind of showing a distinction between who they were then and who they are now.
Absolutely. And, you know, Nat had probably the most, I guess, maybe fashionable or trendy or, you know, distinct, I guess, look in the 90s. But she had like a little bit more of like a 70s or 80s look, maybe not quite as 90s. How did you get that?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, she is a rebel. She's a little bit more punky, but not totally punk. I mean, in the 90s, you know, 70s vintage was really popular because it was kind of the beginning of like ironic fashion and that kind of stuff. And so we tied that in with her. She doesn't have a lot of money. She shops at thrift stores. She's got great style. She puts that look together for herself. Sophie had that amazing haircut, which is kind of like a little bit of a bleached mullet. So we kind of worked with that to create that look. And that was really fun. She looked fantastic in those clothes. And I love her costumes.
Absolutely. That was a very good look. You know, we had a question come in on Twitter when we said we were going to be talking to you. Vine, Coven of Chaos Era, wanted to know, how did you design Misty's outfits? What came into your mind to make them so amazing? Because they really are cute.
Nice. Well, Misty, you know, she is... she's one of the most fun characters because she's so complicated. She's a nerd, she's smart, but she plays kind of innocent and naive, which she is, but really underneath she's kind of a sadist. The pilot was. So the cat thing looks it's so cliched, that theme that it's so kitsch and like it would have been really dorky and it's immature, you know. She dresses a little bit younger. She has the braces too, than the other girl. She's not as worldly or sophisticated, but also I like the idea of a cat because we all know that cats play with their prey and they'll like torture a mouse or something until they kill it. And there's that great scene in the pilot where she's just watching that rat, or is it a possum? I can't remember. Swimming in the pool, till it drowns. And that to me is like such a distinctive, like she's just curious about what it looks like to suffer, you know, and doesn't save it. So those are it's sort of like, that's what it's supposed to be. It's sort of like the innocent look, but we all know that really underneath she's
something
crazy.
else. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Doom Coming. How much like creative direction were you given from production? What was the task that you were given? Like celebratory outfits? Like how did the Doom Coming process come together?
Let's see. Well, I knew that there was going to be, they wrote into the script that they Van and Van was going to have a mask, that they were going to have flower crowns. So and so from that point, I kind of designed those alphabet. I wanted them all to be, the thing that's fun about the flower crowns is that that's something that girls make and they're pretty. It was, if the scene we see in the pilot is their winter festival or their winter.
Oops.
Oh no.
Oh, you're frozen, Marie.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. You're back. Okay.
Oh yeah. So can you still hear me or did you miss all that?
We missed it.
We missed it.
Oh,
Sorry.
Start again. So I knew that so things that were written in the script, we knew Thaisa and Van were going to have masks. We knew that there was going to be flower crowns. And so that from that starting point, I started to design. If this scene we see in the pilot is their winter sort of ceremony, this was supposed to be sort of like the beginning of their fall. It was supposed to have a more of a fall feel. And they don't know it, but this is the beginning of whatever that is. Later on in the series, we know it as the audience, and we start to see it. And it, and so flower crowns are something that girls know how to do growing up. You learn how to make a daisy chain, or so each one. I wanted them to be distinctive. I tried to match crowns to personalities. We used different flowers, and then we aged those down because everything in the woods is kind of dying a little bit at this point. It's fall.
Yeah.
We knew that they would have some kind of formal wear dresses in their luggage that they were going to wear. They're on their way to this soccer tournament. So the final thing in a soccer tournament usually is some kind of dinner or like an awards dinner or
banquet or something.
Yeah, exactly. So that was part of, so we knew they'd have those. Some people ended up wearing a nightgown because theirs was destroyed in the plane crash. And then we started to kind of layering those costumes in different ways, the way we would later on. And I wanted those masks for Thaisa and Van to be really cool so that they looked like rock stars when they walk in holding hands. And I did a weaving technique on Van's mask that would look similar to some weaving we did later on in the winter scene. Like I tried to incorporate some of the techniques we used for those winter ceremony costumes into what was going on here.
Cool.
It was
Very
fun
cool.
to kind of like keep it going.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you were responsible for creating the Antler Queen costume as well. Tell us from start to finish, from the second you knew, there was going to be an Antler Queen, what that process looked like, and like the hair, like how did you come up with all these incredible details?
Well, I knew that there was going to be in the script, it was written that there was a ceremony at the end where they kill someone and they're eating this body. And everyone was dressed in fur because it was like cold, basically.
Yes.
And so in my interview for the job, I was like, it'd be really fun. And I was like, what is this? And they were like, it's a ceremony. So once we knew that it wasn't just like dinner time, that it actually had some deeper meaning to it, I was like thinking about like what it would be. And so I just said it would be really interesting knowing how girls have social hierarchies. There's like the popular girl and her mean girl best friends and how it goes down. I was like, it'd be really fun to have some kind of distinction. So each, what we were calling acolyte to the Antler Queen, I was like, it starts with rabbits and then there's a skunk or a possum. And then, it goes up the sort of we're marrying a social high school hierarchy to a an animal hierarchy in terms of like, so Misty has a wolf on her. And we, you know, I checked with Ashely and Bart. I'm like, is this something that would happen? And they're like, we know they're going to have a gun, and we know there's going to be someone's going to shoot a wolf at some point. So I'm like, okay, great, we can put a wolf on Misty. But the main person in the middle, who we were calling the Oracle because they had sort of like, they were sort of the fixture in the middle. We were like, how are we going to distinguish this person as the top of the heap, basically? And I couldn't quite figure it out. And then at some point I was like, well, humans are the top of the heap, and so let's do human hair. And then I designed it to look like a queen's cape, like an ermine cape. And the antlers really are there to distort her frame and her figure so that it's not human. Like, we're not supposed to think of that person as a human. We're supposed to think it as otherworldly. And then early on, having conversations with Karen, you know, I keep going back to this thing, like, this is a show about girls and women, there's not a lot of men in this movie, and what is distinctive about that. So there's a scene where we know that Misty was going to take off the mask, and it's revealed at the end of the show that it's Misty, right? Mm-hmm. And Karen really loved the idea of the mask coming off as like a bridle when I pitched that fur mask to her, because that's sort of like the symbolism. So I kind of try to tie in that we used a dress, a 90s crocheted dress, and in sort of a veil-like way, because it's something that only women wear, you know, really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, you know, your design has spawned so much cosplay. Our friend Kaylee, you probably have seen her pictures. She is our cosplay queen, and her Antler Queen costume, this is like her glow up. She had one before that was a little less complex, but I mean, she totally nailed it. And I mean, what a vision you had that now so many people are copying. I mean, on Halloween, did you see on Instagram how many people were dressed up?
That's like the ultimate compliment to a costume designer. Sure. But it's bigger than an Oscar, is to have people wear your designs. So, I mean, I really had fun with it because I like the idea of infusing. I tried to make it a little bit fashionable. I gave her wigs, you know, so that also, because I feel like aesthetics is an important part to teen girls, you know, how you look. Yeah. So I think they would be making it their own. That's why there's like earrings attached to things. So they took what they had in their luggage, but they made it new. They designed their stuff a little bit. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love the bunny.
Yes. I mean, all the costumes are just so incredible. The furs and stuff, are those real furs that you guys used, or I mean, are they?
No, there was a long debate about whether to use real fur. I mean, some of them are, like I think that raccoon is real, but you know, a lot of our actors are also vegan, so we also wanted to respect that. But and also we never, I mean, the thing about what we learned, it was, you know, every project is a learning process because you're doing something pretty new, but I'm glad we didn't use real furs, because these costumes have to last for many, many years, and a lot of times those raw furs or whatever aren't cured, and they, you know, they fall apart if you don't put them. So we were able to do that. I mean, making it out of fake fur is a lot more complicated than you would imagine, because fake fur comes in bolts, and we had to cut out each rabbit fur and gradiate the color, because, you know, it's different on the paws than it is on the back, and age it. And then it also doesn't have suede on the back. We had to, you know, so it was a long process, but it looks so beautiful. And we worked with the gorgeous costume house Mudo Little, and they made all that stuff, and it looks,
yeah, it does look amazing.
Everything came out so good. I mean, from start to finish, everything. I mean, did you feel there was more going into the design for this show than for others, in terms of like the animal aspect, the two different timelines? Like, what do you think was your biggest challenge, I guess?
I mean, it's funny because a friend of mine is used our pilot as a template for a class that they're teaching at UCLA, costumes, because there's so many factors. First of all, it's a sports show because we have all the soccer tournaments. It's a period show because it's 90s. it's a contemporary show because you have the contemporary stuff that's going on, and then it's this fantasy wilderness stuff. So yeah, it was huge in terms of a pilot because there's so many distinctive things, and I had to have people working on different elements of the show because they're all so different and bring it all together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you have a favorite character to design for?
That's really hard because they're all fun. I have to say, I give it out to Ashely and Bart. They created really complex, interesting characters, and I love working with Karn because she really has a sensibility that made it gritty, which was fun. I mean, I love the 90s. I loved Lottie's 90s. I love all the 90s stuff. That was really fun. The wilderness obviously was such a fantasy, and we got to really, it really was like very fun to play in that world and like think of new ideas. And we were given a lot of creative freedom, obviously, to create the Antler Queen. I mean, obviously that was something I worked on with the writers and Karn, but it was encouraged to really step out into a creative playground and kind of think of stuff. So it's hard to say, but I guess Natalie is really fun.
Yes.
I don't want to commit to anything.
Right. Hey, I mean, we love them all too. We totally get it. I mean, in all of their own ways, they're each very special.
Exactly.
So.
I mean, I even like the preppiness of Jackie. That was
I do too.
So specific. And then Shauna, I mean, that's like, who can't relate to that look of the t-shirt and that? I mean, that's kind of, I don't know. They all have a really fun element, and I loved trying to marry that to who they become. I mean, Natalie is such a, I think when for Juliet's version, the adult version, I mean, she's such a, she's a grifter, and she's kind of like always morphing. So she starts out like rich woman in a rehab, and then she gets into like leopard pants. It's fun. It's really fun to think about all those things.
Absolutely. And just in terms of, the costume designs, the approvals process, right? Like how many iterations of certain things did you have to go to? Did they love some of them right away? Or did they kind of say, hey, it's almost there. Like, let's go back and perfect a couple details. Like, what was the approval process like?
It was challenging. Like some of the things people didn't like at first, like, we're dealing with a couple different studios, Showtime and E1, who are both producing it. And everybody has a different idea of what they want the show to look like. But it really came together in a really good way. And I think the most important thing for them was like that the actors look like the same person in the past, and also that the wilderness was distinctively, that world in the wilderness, their survival techniques was distinctively made by teenage girls. That was another thing. So like, one of the things that we couldn't decide on is there's some woven pieces in that wilderness, and we cut up sweaters and clothes, and we wove it in as if, that's a technique, a basic weaving technique that I found in a sort of like a wilderness book from the 30s, but also girls would learn how to do pot holders and stuff at camp. And so you'd know how to do basic weaving. And that, I think it was just a kind of a constant conversation between me and the director and the writers, because at first they were like, no, that's too pretty, Mary. That looks like something you buy at, a fancy boutique. But then as we aged it and they realized that it was unique then it spoke about this show, and it distinguished this group of people in the wilderness. They were like, oh, let's put those back in and let's do the woven ponchos.
Right.
So it was fun in the sense that it wasn't just like, yes, no, I like this. It was more of a conversation that kind of went on, and we were able to.
And what about the timeline for it? Like from the moment you received the pilot script to when your job was complete on Yellowjackets, how long were you involved in the process for?
Well, I think we had like 8 weeks to do the pilot, which is a really long time. We shot for, I think we shot for the pilot took a long time. It took like at least 2 or 3 weeks to shoot it. So, and then but then of course COVID hit. That was in 2019. They didn't pick the show up for a year and a half. So we weren't even sure it was going to happen. And then we shot season 1 in the summer of 2021. And so I came back at the end of that, like in August and September of 2021, and kind of wrapped it all together. But so it was a really long process, but it was, and you know, it's very hard to shoot the show. They have 2 units going at all times. One is in the wilderness, and one is, you know, in town and contemporary. And it's big, you know, and linking all that stuff. They do an amazing job.
I mean, I do some work in TV production as well. Anytime there's 2 units, I mean, that's like a whole nother thing. And scheduling that is, you know, a job in itself. But I mean, everything came out so great from season 1, and all the looks were incredible. Do you have any other funny or fun, like behind the scenes moments to share, or any like memories from set, or, you know, things that that we might not know just from looking at your social media?
Oh, let's see. I mean, it was darn cold. We shot the wilderness stuff up in Mammoth after a huge snowstorm, and it was like, I don't know, 10 degrees. We were all in full snowsuits, and I felt terrible for our only Misty was the only actor we had. Everyone else was a stunt person or background person, but you know, the fake fur is not very warm. It's not like real fur. So it was layering up, and people were definitely cold. And we used venison in that scene. And of course, our actor is vegan. And so it was very challenging for her to, you know, serve that up and cut it up and everything. So that was fun. I mean, it's interesting how many challenges there are on set. You know, we were trying to find people, but then people had nail polish. Our background people had nail polish on, so we had to figure out a way to like cover that up because you wouldn't have nail polish at that time. And I'm trying to think of anything that's funny. I mean, it's a really, there are so many funny bits in that show, and everyone has such a great understanding of their character. But it's an intense show because it's about suffering and childhood trauma. So it's like. So sometimes the set can be kind of intense, actually.
Yeah,
absolutely. Ooh. Well, I mean, I think we've covered most of our questions. Emily, is there anything else that you would like to know?
I just have one question about the Antler Queen. Now, when you see her antlers, she has something hanging off of them. Like, are those earrings?
Yeah, they're earrings.
Okay. So I was always so curious.
And then she has, you can't really see it the way it's been shot, but you can see it in this photo. She has some antler wings as well.
Yeah, she has back antlers.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So one of the things that's fun about that scene is like, we couldn't show who these people were because it's a mystery, but also we still don't really know who the acolytes are. We were calling them acolytes.
You came up with the name acolytes? That was like you guys' thing? Your thing?
I think so. I can't remember. But yeah. I'm going to say yes.
Okay. We will
and we called the Antler Queen the Oracle. The fans have called it the Antler Queen. But and now it is the Antler Queen, let's face it. So but yeah, I mean, so we knew it was going to be cold, and we were like, how are we going to cover their faces? We can't show skin color. We can't show hair. Like, one of the things about choosing the hair that was going to be on the Antler Queen is that we didn't want to have too many different styles because then people will be guessing whose hair it is. And so we just kind of went with dark hair and not too much of it. You know, there was definitely a lot of discussions about how much human hair was going to be on that. And
it is human hair, right? It's actual human hair. Okay.
At a hair salon, and where you buy extensions, and you know, and it's different kinds of hair. It's curly and straight, and but you know, and the idea there was like, we don't know if those are victims. or if someone just cut their own hair off and put it in. So it's like it gives the writers more room to like try to figure out how to get to that place, you know, because we had to leave them some room. But with and same thing with the acolytes, we couldn't show skin, couldn't show hair color. And then I found some images of some African warriors had made sweaters into balaclavas. And so I'm like, oh, that makes sense. It keeps them warm. They have their sweaters. They need to cover their faces up. We used pantyhose in some. I really love this image. We used a raincoat because Karen, in my first meeting with her, was like, I love this pink in the snow. And I'm like, I'm going to find a pink raincoat. It's also so girly. And it's like a tech fabric against the fur, which is nice. Yeah, we used tights. And we kind of made them into these different creatures. It was really fun.
That's so cool. You know, we talked a little bit about the animals and, you know, what animals you could use. Our friend Phoenix wanted to know, you know, how they decided on what animals the characters would wear, you know, which we did talk about. We talked about the wolf. We saw the skunk and raccoon. Is there any other
Missy's mask is a beaver.
Beaver. Okay. All right.
We had that. And then we had
the owl. Is that an owl?
That's an opossum.
That is an opossum.
Oh,
okay. That's a possum. Possum, raccoon, bunny.
Yeah, I mean, we had to get some real furs so that we could make the fake furs look real. We had to be like, okay, this is the skunk took some time to make. Yeah, but you can see that that's like a sleeve of a sweater. And we made gaiters out of gloves out of sweaters, and we try to give it layers so that it looks scarier.
Yes.
Warm.
Yes. Now the team colors of Yellowjackets. Did you have any hand in selecting the colors? I mean, obviously, like Yellowjackets are going to be yellow paired with some other color. Did you come up with the blue to go with the yellow?
No, that was our producer Drew told me it has to be blue and gold, which is it's pretty combination. And we came up, you know, we designed all the uniforms and everything.
Wow. So I mean, you did pretty much everything, not everything, but I mean, you set the tone for the entire season in terms of costumes. And like you said, you dealt with so many challenges in terms of the 90s, the contemporary, the wilderness, the aging, the animals. I mean, like, could you have had any more factors in play for the show?
It's funny because I was just thinking like, I called my friends from college and high school and was like, send me the ones who played soccer, send me your soccer pictures and your yearbook pictures. And so I kind of designed Jackie off of some of she's like my sort of preppy friend who's a jock in high school. So yeah, it was definitely like I was definitely thinking about people I knew in the 90s when I was doing those costumes.
Perfect place to draw inspiration from. And gosh, the 90s were such a good time. I was a 90s kid myself. So, I mean, you really just nailed all the aesthetics. You know, the Coed Naked, so cool. The Converse, the plaid, all of it. And thank you for creating our Antler Queen. I think the entire fandom would like thank you, as it's, you know, such a symbol of the show and, you know, so well loved within the fandom. So,
so
thank
iconic.
you for you're a costume design genius. So
thanks for enjoy. I mean, it was fun to, like I said, I enjoyed it as much as you guys. I'm a huge fan. So, it's a mutual pleasure.
Yay. What projects are you working on now? Anything current?
Well, I just finished season 2 of a show called Minx, which is set in the 1970s, and it's about a sort of a fictionalization of a porn magazine. It's another feminist. It has a feminist bent, which seems to be the unifying link to all my shows. So,
yes, and you said that's on Stars. That's going to be on Stars.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's exciting.
Excellent.
Early 70s is always, because I'm also a 90s kid, it's always a favorite of mine. So,
yay. Well, we cannot thank you enough for joining us today. Your insights into the costume design of Yellowjackets are absolutely exceptional. Phenomenal work through and through. And thank you. We
It's
appreciate you
nice to
taking
meet
the
you
time.
guys.
Yeah.
And if you
Yeah,
have
it was
any
so
other
great to have
questions,
you.
email me.
Yeah, we
Answer them
absolutely
right away.
will. Thank you. Well, that was so much fun, and huge thanks to Marie for joining us. That was really cool getting her perspective on costume design for Yellowjackets.
She has, and we also touched base on like the cosplay that's come out of this, like in the fandom too, and like showed her Kaylee's cosplay, and like she said that it's so flattering to have people like dressing up as something that like you created for a TV show. And I think that's really cool too. Like, I can't imagine how that would feel like to create something and then have people love it so much that they want to mimic it and copy it.
Well, Emily, they do say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. I don't know if you've
I
heard that before,
certainly
but
do.
yes, yes. So I mean that was really cool. I appreciate Marie taking the time to join us, and
Yeah.
hopefully our hive was able to learn a little bit more behind the scenes into the Yellow Jackets costume design. We appreciate all of you hive babes. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
Yes. Until we spill again.